Presence, the podcast for everyone interested in bodywork, embodiment, and somatic practices. I'm Andrew Rosenstock, your host and guide on this enlightening journey. With my expertise as a somatic movement therapist, yoga therapist, and certified rolfer, I'll merge clinical insight with real-world experience to enrich our discussions with our guests. Through engaging and informative talks, this podcast delves into mind-body paradigms, offering insights and strategies to empower personal growth. Your support is vital for our grassroots and lo-fi production. If you connect with our content, please leave a positive review and subscribe on your preferred platform. Your engagement helps us reach a broader audience and supports our mission. So thanks for tuning in today to Touching into Presence. Fasten your seatbelt as we embark on a journey to explore the transformative power of contemplative and somatic practices together. It's a pleasure to be in conversation today with David Vago. David is a leading neuroscientist and advisor within the mindfulness, digital health, and psychedelic research communities. He currently serves as president of the International Society for Contemplative Research and holds academic affiliations with Harvard Medical School and the University of Virginia. With training from Vanderbilt, Harvard, Weill Cornell, and the University of Utah, Dr. Vago has held key research and faculty positions, including Associate Professor at Vanderbilt and Research Director at the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. His background spans cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychiatry, and contemplative science, with postdoctoral fellowships in biological and social psychiatry, neuroimaging, and mind-body medicine. Dr. Vago's research explores the neurobiological and psychosocial mechanisms linking mind, brain, and body in mental health, chronic pain, and well-being. Through a combination of neuroimaging, cognitive, behavioral, and phenomenological methods, his work bridges basic neuroscience with clinical application. As a scientific advisor and research lead for RoundGlass, he advances evidence-based innovation in digital health and well-being. A prolific author with over 100 publications and more than 15,000 citations, Dr. Vago is a recognized thought leader whose research has shaped the emerging field of contemplative science and continues to inform modern approaches to mindfulness and integrative health. In today's conversation, David shares how neuroscience, phenomenology, and contemplative practice converge in understanding embodiment. We explored his spacer model, which traces experience from bodily sensation through perception, cognition, meta-awareness, and action, revealing how identity continually reforms moment by moment. And David spoke about interception and the neural basis of felt experience, highlighting how awareness of internal states shapes behavior, emotion, and selfhood. He also introduced emerging research in bioenergetics, linking the brain's energetic and lymphatic systems with traditional ideas of chi, prana, and subtle energy. And throughout, he emphasized that awareness itself is medicine, that small embodied shifts ripple through our biology and relationships. His work invites us to see embodiment as a living dialogue between brain, body, and world, a path toward a more conscious and compassionate way of being. As you can tell by the length of our talk, it was one that was enjoyed by both of us and could have gone on for a lot longer. And hopefully we'll be back and talk again, as it was something I really enjoyed and something I find very important for the world and for how I wish more people were thinking. But anyways, that's enough of that. Let's get into our talk.
Hello, Andrew.
Hey, David.
How are you doing?
I'm all right,
Yeah.
just navigating the joys of being a private practice, self-employed person and father to a almost 1-year-old and
Wow.
yeah, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say navigating the joys of being human.
Well, that too.
At this point, there's so many different challenges we're all facing, like just our own personal challenges are, it gets sidelined for compared to all the things that are happening in the world. And it's an interesting time. I mean, interesting in the sense that like we as a species are in this sort of point where inflection point for making choices, real tough choices about how we spend our time with our own lives and trying to succeed and make it as in the rat race of every sort of element of society, and helping humanity survive, right, and last beyond our children or our children's children's generation. if your 1-year-old is going to flourish, what has to happen? And sometimes I take that perspective and it's like, gosh, so many other things need to happen before I finish this paper, or is this the right thing I should be prioritizing?
Yeah. It's a bit of a sidetrack, but I'm like, do you think it's more so now than any other time period, or do you think it's just that we have more access to information in a way, so we're seeing things more, or
A little bit of
both?
both. I
Yeah.
think both. Yeah. Yeah, it's right. It's like information is interesting. I was reading um, the book Nexus, um, and Yuval Harari talks about this idea of information and how information is key to basically evolving as a species. And whether information is correct information or misinformation, or just repeated information that's wrong, it causes, a lot of changes around the world. And some people just don't even listen, right, to information. Some people just
Well,
kind of.
they listen to information, but it's interesting how information. My wife's from a different culture. We had an argument today over something where we're looking at the same information and yet decoding it differently.
Yeah,
And so
right.
we're both listening, but we're
Yeah,
listening through our own decoders. And
it's a really good point, and that's I come back to the Dalai Lama's message on this one, and that he says very clearly that over and over again, he said we have so many differences that we can talk about for sure, and differences always or most often lead to some kind of disagreement. But if we focus on what we are, all the things that make us more alike, the chance of us thriving is much higher. If we focus on the things that make us different and unique, it's great to talk about those things, but they don't help us connect or to build together, collaborate, and help. If we're really looking to heal and to help build humanity up, our best skills are when we work together collaboratively, as that's what humans are good at. They're best at working together as a team.
Yeah.
Teamwork makes the dreams work.
And I think there's an irony in that there's actually probably we have more in common than different, but the differences can speak louder, especially to when people are in various states of being, which we'll maybe dive into later more so. But it is evolutionary. The difference is more scary or more threatening, and therefore in some way more easier to see because the same will keep us the same. And the difference is either life or death in a way, or at least we're kind of wired to see it that way.
Yeah, wired to see it that way, certainly, because it's, in-group, out-group dynamics started from fear of being killed by an other that is not our friend, right? That wants to compete. It's our competitor. So we're always built to compete with the people that look like us or talk like us or sound like us. And then if you see someone who's very different from us, then it's much easier to other them. The othering of people is where we're at, I think. And who can get to the top of the food chain fastest with the most amount of likes is, seemingly constructed this narrative that's the place to be. But then you get there and the people who are at, in these sort of positions of power, they just don't know what to do at that point. They don't know how to actually give back or to help humanity, right? There's the unequal the unequal amount of wealth that is distributed across the world is contributing to probably the majority of our problems. We just don't know what to do when there's a small percentage of people who have tons of power, then they build up bigger walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or build rocket ships to leave everyone else in the dust.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I would say many to most of them, but not all of them, not all the people in that
Yeah, I'm
power.
generalizing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that if there is a pattern to follow, it's the one that it's the path that takes you towards collaboration and working together and lifting people up
Mm-hmm.
with compassion that makes transformation for many,
Mm.
not just one.
Yeah. There's a part of me that says I think we've said more in these few minutes, and I don't even know if we've technically started. I'll have to ask you if you're okay with sharing that, or if you prefer to not,
Yeah.
because yeah,
Are we recording?
I always record, and my thought is sort of people will have the hellos, and then we kind of go into like logistics for everyone's talk's different, and then we kind of hop into it, and then I edit it. Sometimes it's just like we just get in and talk, and it's really, I'm going on someone else's podcast next week to try to have an embodied conversation, which is almost paradoxical because we're performing it. Like there's almost an impulsiveness to it because we're both trying to talk about this thing that is pre-conceptual, and
Mm.
I'm really curious how he's going to do it, because as soon as if we do just start recording, there we go. We're kind of in this, but otherwise we're like trying to take these layers off that are somewhat put there by the structure themselves. So
That's going to be an interesting one, especially if you're trying to um, provide an example of what it's like to be embodied.
yeah,
What is an embodied mind?
yeah, yeah. Which is hopefully we'll chat with. One interesting thing I'll just point out, it's maybe just a coincidence, but before you mentioned Yuval Noah Harari, when you were just started talking in the beginning, I was thinking of him. I was like, there was something in either how you were speaking or how you were, even just how you were embodying, just sitting here. And I was like, just thinking of this, something aligns with Yuval Noah Harari. I don't really know why, but when you said it, it was just like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I read his book recently, and it's probably resonating with me in a frustrating way, in a way that's like he pointed to the sort of evident truths of the digital um, age that we find ourselves in here with AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really have a conversation these days without bringing that up. It's either AI or Trump that sort of occupies, it gets people really excited.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he has a really interesting way of talking about it from this information theory perspective, which is what really provides an infrastructure, a framework for how we can even have conversations
Mm-hmm.
about anything. So if we're talking about embodiment, there's so much disparate kind of ways of using that word
Mm-hmm.
that it's hard to understand what it really is and what does it mean. And we all know it's sort of a good thing to be embodied, to be in the body.
Yeah.
But what is it? How do you really operationalize it, and how do you work with it? How do you measure it is the hard part from my perspective. I'm always
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how to measure it because there are not a lot of good ways to do that. We talk about the phenomenology. In fact, I'm doing this really large research project right now that's a phenomenological one. We can talk about that too. But anyway, so that's there's I think sort of we're at a point of critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
in this age today, right now, October 2025, where Yuval Harari's message of information theory and how we communicate is critical because it could lead to disaster, and the human race doesn't necessarily have to continue on.
No.
And that's the kind of message I got from that book was like, depending on the choices we make, and if we at least embody those choices with good intentions, there's a chance. But especially if you don't believe in free will, or if you don't see how all these interconnected patterns and interdependent relationships lead to the demise of humanity, there has to be a real shift for that narrative to improve, right? So if we want to actually be better people, better humans, better, for your children, right, and your children's children, if we really care about them, we need to be really making decisions that break the patterns of our everyday habits.
Have you figured out how to do that yet?
I try. I am very actually. I would say I'm the last person to sit in the same seat every day. I'm the last person to walk the same path that that I did yet the day before. I'm the last person to, to really just. I'm very mindful of my patterns, and I really I embrace my name Vago, which means in Latin to wander. It's in fact, that's part of my whole philosophy on life is based on this bumper sticker that I had in like high school. All those
not all
who wander are lost. Yeah, exactly. From J.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
And that I think it's important that we consciously do things different from our everyday habits and routines, just so we get this taste of relative free will. Because I do have some disagreement with many of my colleagues who make free will seem hopeless, and that, of course, in retrospect, when you look at all your choices, that there's a causal chain. I think it's very easy to say everything you do leads to now, and that you can just look back retrospectively at that chain of events and say, well, each of these decisions were made in a predictive manner. You can predict that that was what was going to happen. But, there's also this sort of relative free will, and whether or not, the world has already decided that I was going to drop that pen because of my upbringing and because of my J.R. Tolkien interests. Not all wander who are lost. That led me to drop the pen as an example. But at the same time, we can just sit and do nothing. And that's the argument is, what can you do other than just sitting and doing nothing? What can you do to have an impact? And when you step out of your routine and you just start talking to people that you maybe never ever thought you would talk to, just do it. Right. And what happens? It's like something changes, right? Suddenly you thinking you would never talk to that person sitting next to you on the train, but you decide to just say hi. Like, oh, I see what you're reading. And suddenly this whole world opens up. And it's like, how did that happen from a decision that you wouldn't normally have made? But I think that's the spice of life these days, is to figure out how to, just step out of our everyday routine, just a little, right? And taste some of the entropy that's out there.
I have a question you don't have to answer. What comes up when I hear you say that, though, is so like every day you sit in a different seat, right? Every day you take a different path. But wouldn't the everyday doing something different in a way be every day doing something the same?
Yeah. Well, yeah. The fact that you're doing something different every day is the same. Yeah, of course. It's inescapable. We are bound to Indra's net, right? Meaning we are all causally connected through a chain of events that happens in this reality, and we can wax upon some of the quantum theory out there, of course, that people like to talk about when it comes to entanglement and superposition, and the fact that, like, every action that we have has some sort of equal sort of counteraction or some related action somewhere else in the world. There's this great Sogyal Rinpoche, one of my teachers. He said, if we are interdependent with everything and everyone else. Even our smallest, least significant thoughts, words, and actions have real consequences throughout the universe.
Mm.
I always think about that. And I think that's part of the motivation for trying to just step out of your comfort zones. So, I don't change up my chair, but I don't move my books every day.
I actually think bringing it into a relation to free will and embodiment, I believe and if you have to draw it out, is what you're actually doing is inquiring. And so it's not so much about doing something different per se, as much as going in and because what I was trying to get at is this like pendulum that people have, where either they're always doing the same or they're intentionally like going to the extreme, and finding this middle way where there is more free will of, okay, there's a pattern I have and I'm playing into the pattern, and even saying, okay, well, normally I want to do this, and I know I could go to this other way, but where in this spectrum, feels right in this moment, and allowing that to be the sort of difference of sorts. That's what I would presume with what I do know of you is really what's happening. Is it's not an intentional contrarian. I'm going to do something different, right?
Sometimes it maybe. It certainly started that way when I was young, just to be different, right? But yeah, I had a professor in undergrad who was teaching us learning and memory. It was learning memory class, and I never sat in the same seat, and he never remembered my name. And one day he pointed me out. He's like, "You, what is your name? I don't know who you are. You don't sit in the same seat every day." And that's how I remember everybody. And so, yeah, I did that kind of purposely, just because I was kind of messing with him. But at the same time, I do find that if, meta awareness, we'll just dive right in here.
Yeah.
Meta awareness, awareness of our own thoughts and behaviors, internally and externally, what's happening around us, to know what engages our attention, to know, just to be able to observe our own mind and how it pays attention to the things that it seems to be salient or relevant is a practice. And that practice is mindfulness. It's just being aware, and being aware of our experience provides insight into our mental and behavioral patterns or habits. And if we become aware of those habits, then we can assess them. We can evaluate whether they are helping us. Are they adaptive? Do they hurt others? Are they kind? We can evaluate all of our actions and see if they're in alignment with our values. And that insight is invaluable. It's like the gold of what makes us better humans. So we can, change our behaviors. And behavior change is, one of the sort of concepts in clinical health psychology that we focus on, even when you hear that word, in the context of research, it only actually refers to like changes of behavior in eating, smoking, and exercise. Those are the three behaviors that they're really trying to change. But when I refer to it in the context of meditation, I think of it as changing all patterns of thinking, of being in the world, of acting and behaving in the world. That insight that you get from the just doing something different, stepping out of your everyday habit, provides the insight in an embodied way, right? So, and when I say embodied, I mean it gives you insight into how you are situated in any context, right? So if my wife and I have a habit where, at the end of the night, like 9 o'clock, 9:30, we're tired, and we go to what's called OTC, on the couch. So we're basically on the couch and relaxing and having our OTC time is what we call it. But sometimes we'll go for a walk, or there's, or like something different, right? Like a walk. Well, I know, and sometimes it changes. Like you have a conversation that you didn't expect to have. You might bump into someone or something, like an animal that you're like, wow, look, there was a bear last night. It was crazy. We saw a bear. So many things can happen that have that perturbation of the butterfly's wing. Like Sogyal Rinpoche was talking about. If everything is interdependent, everything and everyone, smallest words, thoughts, actions can all have ripple effects on the entire universe. So I think my point is that an embodied experience is one in which that you're present in your body. It's situated, it's enacted in terms of how you relate to the world around you. So every time you interact with the world, you're having an effect on the world itself, and the world is having an impact on you, meaning the environment itself, right? So whether you make a coffee or you don't make a coffee, you're affecting the way that trees are being planted in Ecuador, right? So all of those causal connections of interdependence, I think, become very salient if you really go deep into exploring with meta awareness, with just quiet reflection, how your mind works. And that nature of mind brings you into that causal chain of events that you can follow down the rabbit hole, and see the tree in Ecuador producing coffee beans. Maybe in fair trade ways, or maybe in slave labor.
When you were saying earlier about some differences with your views and your colleagues, it was when I first heard you, and we spoke about this when we had our first call, but it was on some podcast years ago, and I remember not being a huge fan of the host per se, but I heard you, and I was like, I want to talk to that guy. That guy. There was something about you, and I would guess with my background in basic phenomenology, there was probably something in that because even when I hear you talking now about the being in the world, that when I first sort of read into Heidegger, I didn't really get it, or I thought I got it, and I conceptually got being in the world, and then a shift happened when being in the world was, we use the words we're using here, more of an embodied, less of a conceptual framework, and really emerging with the being with and of the world. And I think that phenomenological view, I'm biased on it because it's now a prime part of how I view the world, how I live in the world. So it's become a cognitive bias, I'll say, of sorts. But I think that is really crucial. And hearing you speak in it that way is, I'm just kind of recognizing that.
Yeah, I recently put out a chapter in a book on the phenomenology, more the neurophenomenology and mindfulness, about the self, related to the self transformation. And it's worth maybe mentioning, in it, I talk specifically about what I call temporal chronometry of experience. And how you as a body, because if anything, you have agency in a body, and you as a body interact in the world with an internal structure in your brain that also has its own temporality, right? Like there's changes, neurochemical and otherwise, that are happening in your brain and body that you don't even have awareness of, but can determine a lot about your experience. And so, my part of my whole chapter of the neurophenomenology was describing that the processes that are happening even at the millisecond level in perception that determine what you pay attention to, right? So over time, you are training your brain and your body to experience the world in a particular way that fits your narrative and your self-identity. And that conditioning, that sort of self-reifying conditioning, meaning like who you are, if you described yourself, if anybody described you, who would they describe? What would they say about you? What do you say about yourself? Who are you, right? What are the characteristics that define you? Those are the characteristics that are going to come up, are the ones that happen most often, right? If I'm a dad, it's because I interact with a child that happens to be mine. And I do a lot of dad things. I cook breakfast, or I go on walks with, hold hands, go play soccer, whatever it is that creates over time and repetition creates a part of my identity. Right? But there's so many processes that are happening underneath the hood, so to speak, that contribute to the experience and the identity that you have. Right. So what are those, and how, as long as we understand that there is this real model of what I call the spacer model. It's really just about the somatic, the experience in the body first, then something more about perception, and you have a full experience really just about cognitive and emotional, and then something response. So you have this whole string really of moments that you can monitor, and that whole ability to monitor your somatic experience through this phenomenal lens, right, of what it is like, the aspect of consciousness. What am I experiencing? What is this like? It's always in the present, but you can dip into the somatic processing of what the body is doing, how it processes sensory information, and how they may relate to this sort of embedded engagement with environment, whatever environment you're in. It contributes to your present moment awareness, but then it leads to this sort of perseverative way of thinking about thoughts and feelings in this deeply interconnected way. It becomes very self-reflective. It could take away of processing other things in the world. It definitely biases how you see the world. But then you have these, what I call the epistemic or meta-awareness, that's second person knowledge of your mental processes. And through that, what I would think of as more analytical, metacognitive aspects of the mind. It can also be non-conceptual or non-propositional, meaning that it's not linguistic in any way. It's just an experience of you in the world that's non-dual. It dissolves the subject-object distinction, and then you respond. There's a behavioral response, a motor action always, whether I drop the pen or whether I go out and take a walk with my wife, or I sit on the couch or talk or don't talk. There's always a behavior, and this is the physical manifestation and expression of all those preceding complex internal processes. So it reflects the organism's adaptive, what I call the inactive response to its surroundings, because inaction really suggests that there's an embodied experience in a particular context. And so the choice of acting in the world is influenced by your perception of the context, the goals, your emotional state. If you just had a fight with a loved one, it might change how you respond. And then the evaluation of the situation. It all comes back into these sort of range of complex potential behaviors. And if there is a multiverse out there, then there's a multiverse of responses that could happen. And you have the power in this sort of relative reality to choose based on all the information that you get from the somatic, the phenomenal, the cognitive, the epistemic, to respond. And that's why I call it the spacer model. But
yeah, I mean, you've just in a more scientific way just explain what I do for work, which is people come in for usually physical discomfort, and my whole work is to get them into awareness, not of just the pain, but what is actually happening. Is it a conceptual pain? Is it a physical pain? Is that physical pain because the word I would use is they're bracing elsewhere, or they're bracing in general, which we're almost all bracing. Just to sit up right now, I am partly bracing. Now I could sit in a way that had less bracing, but my structure either has come to a way where it doesn't form that, or the way that my body somatically or in the cerebellum coding has started to learn that. Now there's an opportunity even here. I can shift and say, okay, that's a little better. I move my feet, but until I actually have the awareness that I could even do that, there's no possibility of it. And so often what I'm working to do is to bring people, first, just to even get them to realize, hey, that bracing you're doing is not aware until it becomes aware. Which for some people is really easy. And for some people, they can't seem to get out of it in that moment. The pain is too much of an alert, which then is also informing me that, okay, there's many other processes going on. What is the way that we need to do to shift that awareness? And I think a lot of what I am attempting to do is to bring it into the meta awareness, but really to have, and correct me if I'm using these words incorrect, to have the meta awareness point more towards that conceptual awareness. That's just the somatic awareness that is non-dual, because the way that I say it is it's happening at a non-linguistic level. It's prior to, and so it's just phenomena, and we can have a relation with it. Is that making some sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And that's where you can find triggers, signals, phenotypic kind of markers for behavior, right? So like, you're talking about something like a rigidness. Yeah. So like if you have a rigidness in your body, like you're kind of like this, and you don't realize it, it's contributing a lot to your feelings and your thoughts.
And your way of being in the world.
And your way of being in the world, yeah, very restricted, right? Instead of, there is this reason why there's research actually being done on this, where you do the super power pose, where you put your hands on your hips and you stick your chest out and you stand there, and it's empowering to just stand, there like that. And that's where, somatic body work can be amazing, because it takes you out of those habitual sort of structures in which you put your body that can have an influence on your perception, what thoughts and emotions come into your head, because the thoughts and emotions that are associated with this or this, or any sort of rigidness will manifest the behavioral response with those associations. So if you have trauma associated with some kind of body position, which led to rigidness, right? Rigidness, but it was associated with trauma that you had as a child, even that you may be not even aware of it, but there was something that happened maybe in your childhood that led to some sort of traumatic experience where you froze. And that freezing was a safe place because you didn't get hurt. Then when you're like 45, suddenly you find yourself, when you feel threatened, even in the slightest way, getting really rigid. Right? And is this what you're kind of referring to, right, in your work?
Well, yeah, but I want to also say that the superpose you're talking about, to me, is also rigid.
The what? The superpower?
No, I'm serious. I'm because it's false. So there's value to it, right? So there is something coming on, but it is not. There is a way that we can build that superpose into it but really it's about deconstructing the rigidities that, from that we'll call the traumas or the experiences before, that the habits we've learned. And so that you can find a way for me in that pose, what they're doing is they're attempting to embody or they're, they're superposed. But when we actually can find the way into it, and it's
what it feels like.
yeah, it's helpful because, okay, this is giving a clue. There's another way for me, that it's another way of being, but don't confuse the finger for the moon. That is you attempting to do it. And this is, I think, the real challenge to a lot of the phenomenology and the meta awareness is so often we're in the attempt or the trying to do it. And that looks the same, but it's slightly different. And even that person doing the superpose, when I would say in my experience, because I've worked with, Malcolm Gladwell's 5,000, 10,000 bodies, how many, there is a subtle awareness where you can see or sense the rigidity, even in that seemingly non-rigid way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to feel what that pose is trying to get you to experience. Just putting yourself in there doesn't necessarily lead to the experience.
No, but sorry, I just said it, but the important thing is that, yeah, exactly what you're saying. But the challenge for me is that people don't necessarily get that. And even if you say, hey, I don't want you doing this, in some way, I want you just to feel it. But now you've kind of given them a bit of a drug hit. So there's like, oh, but I felt good in that way, and they haven't learned, well, what is it that's not allowing me to get to this place naturally? And so they go into that, and they model that way, which isn't inherently bad. It works for a while, but because it's built on a false premise, it ultimately falls apart, in my experience. And what I'm wanting to do is to deconstruct all of those false premises into, well, what is this body that is just, how can this body simply be here? Because when I'm putting that Superman pose on, a superhuman pose, I'm not actually being here. I mean, yes, I'm being, but I'm being with an intent to do something, as opposed to simply just being here and having my body be here. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, of course. If you don't recognize that it's actually going to give you an experience that's different, when you with volition put yourself in a new pose that has more empowerment, right, to it. You have to, it's slow, probably, for depending on the individual.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there were the research on it is interesting, because the research has shown that that you can have this sort of effect on multiple systems, whether it's testosterone or sort of lowered cortisol related to a stress response, self-reported feelings of being empowered. There's a lot of research showing that it can be good to do these postures, just like they used to do, to encourage, because there was some research that came out showing that smiling is good for you. It'll lead to more likely period experiences of joy, and that leads to release of endorphins and feelings of dopamine that sort of engage the pleasure pathway, right? So that's going to make you feel good if you smile more. So they did this study where they stuck the pen, in the mouth, and if you bite down on it in the right way, it engages the muscles in the face, to have the Duchenne smile, right? So in order to actually, get the benefits of smiling, that was a sort of a forced kind of mechanism by which to engage the same muscles that lead to benefits. So whether that gave you the actual experience of joy or not, there was some engagement of the muscles that tricked the body into feeling what it's like to smile.
Well, I think that's really interesting. There's a few things. I'm not really concerned with anything that's good, because good is completely subjective to where I'm looking from. And if you're familiar with there's a Chinese Chengyu about the horse farmer whose horse runs away. I don't know if you're familiar with that story.
I think so. We might as well say it.
It's long. It's basically like his horse runs away. His neighbor comes over. He says, "What bad luck." Later, the horse comes and brings three other horses, and the neighbor says, "What good luck?" And and the story goes on, and it's basically saying like good or bad is completely subjective to where and how you're looking at it. And so having and similar, I think when you say, okay, well, this person feels good. Well, sure, but if there's a fire in your house and you put a box around it, you're going to feel better until the box burns down, and then you put another box. Like, so I hear that. I'm less concerned with the studies can show what they're going to show. I find phenomenology and embodiment hard to bring into studies, and I find what they're looking for is somewhat subjective from a certain view. But the pen or the pencil in the mouth made me think of a different way because the intention is really important. The intention can lead in certain ways that we're not necessarily even aware of. So if even the intention can trick us in a way. But if we're just putting a pencil and we're not necessarily trying to smile, for me, what that says is more of how the muscles are tied into our nervous system and largely into sympathetic and parasympathetic. And so we can trick the muscles to switch on in a way, but not necessarily have the intention. So in some way, getting the cognitive awareness of what is out of the way, and by getting that sort of trigger as a meditator, that the monkey mind and the tricks that happen, by getting that out of the way and just having an embodied physiological largely subcortical response, that to me is what's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the research, and it's actually controversial, whether or not this Duchenne smile can be artificially induced. There's a lot of research on it showing that it can make all these sort of pleasure chemicals be released, but the most recent research that I remember seeing, oh gosh, when was it? It was probably it's like just a few years ago, 2022. In Perspectives in Psychological Science, they're basically saying something like, these smiles, what are called Duchenne smiles, which really just means that there's a particular change in zygomatic major muscles, the orbicularis oculi muscles around the eye have to change in a particular way. They raise just a little bit. And it just happens when we genuinely smile and out of enjoyment, you see those changes, right?
Yeah.
So there's something very social about it too, right? Because you're usually smiling in the context with others. And it does engage a lot of vagal activity and feedback to the brain to say, this is positive, release endorphins, do something positive. Right. So that's built in. But when you try to artificially induce it, there is sort of some confounds that can lead to a failure in generating any type of real joy. Intensity may be different. There might be a bias because somebody's watching you.
Oh, sure.
There's also it might not be a perfect context. Like you may be in a really scary context and you're just trying to like induce the smile. And so the marker itself of the movement of those muscles is not necessary nor sufficient to generate joy, but it's a mechanism that we've identified is involved in that process. So just being aware that your smile and how you move the muscles of your face in response to things around you in the world can have an influence on your biology. That's pretty profound, right? Like for some people, they wouldn't believe it. They're like, what? Like just the difference between me smiling out of pure joy or me frowning with the same maybe experience internally can have an effect on my biology. I think that's a surprise to many, but it is indeed the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's a surprise to many. There's a part of me that's like, without sounding rude, isn't that obvious? I mean, but that's again, people come in, and it's for me. As you said, it's more than just the mouth and the mandible and the smile. The way that the face moves is, and there was when I I'd taken a class with Stephen Porges, and I know his work is controversial in the community, so I'll leave that part aside. But there was a part in his class that I appreciated where, and granted, it was a snapshot, but he showed a picture of uh, like two animals after a tsunami um, in Sri Lanka, and you could see on their face, and of course, yes, it's a picture. We could be manipulated or in a certain snapshot, but you could see the freeze in the face that of I forget what animal it was. One was a lizard, so they would have different different neurobiology. Um,
Oh, but they're
but
both frozen. Yeah.
yeah, and but just like seeing that it wasn't just the smile, it was how the whole face. And this is often when people like come in to see me, even when they're saying, "Hey, I'm in," this is also why I'm less concerned with good, is the mental awareness of what's happening can be based on the narrative we tell ourselves. So everything can be good and we can believe it, yet the neurobiology, what's actually happening underneath, if the face is frozen, if they can't seem to move, if there's a bracing, to me that says, well, sure, I'm glad that you're happy, but for me, biologically, all of those processes are coming first. That the cortex is getting a lot of meaning out of that, but it can in some way bypass that and have its own spinning narrative, its own hallucination machine. And but something I've been saying, and please correct me if this is incorrect. I'd say that the mind, I kind of joke, is like a trickster. It kind of lies to us all the time, providing some false sense of truth. But the body actually can't really lie because it's prior to that. It can be led by the mind, but when you really start to tune in with the body, it's just responding minute by or second by second to its actual experience. And when we start to tune into that, we might even say, "Wow, it's really I think I'm happy, but I'm noticing how my body is or isn't moving, and let me be curious about that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and it really is what makes us human,
Hmm.
right? So you can have a reptile that shows all the offensive displays of fear or reflexive defense,
Hmm.
right? Things like freezing,
Hmm.
hissing,
Hmm.
open mouth threat, right? With like a snake. That's all coordinated by set of responses in the midbrain, the
Hmm.
hypothalamus, autonomic
Yeah.
nuclei. The reptiles have their own amygdaloid like complex that creates stimulus response. They may not have the phenomenology, which
Hmm.
there's actually not really any evidence that the reptile, the snake, is having an experience, but maybe they have some sort of proto
Hmm.
affective state that's visceral arousal pattern but we'd be anthropomorphizing if we said
Yeah.
that.
Right. We'll
But
never really know.
yeah, we're not really know. Can't ask them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But with mammals, with humans, we know we have those similar kinds of pathways, right? When
Hmm.
we are scared,
Hmm.
there is so for lack of a better term, the limbic system.
Yeah, I
Um,
understand.
there is some controversy around the use of the word limbic system at all these days because there's no real system that sort of converges around a set of structures
Yeah,
that
but
make up the limbic system.
I
But
know what you mean. I know that.
I won't go there.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I hear
the point
you. I
is,
know.
we do have an amygdala, and
Yeah.
amygdala does respond to stimuli that are threatening.
Hmm.
And it mobilizes activity through the hypothalamus, the periaqueductal
Hmm.
gray, and the brainstem, and it's tightly coupled to a set of structures that provide a phenomenological experience.
Hmm.
The insula, the cingulate
Hmm.
cortex, most of the anterior and dorsal anterior cingulate, but the whole cingulate gets involved, to be honest, because from the anterior cingulate you have more monitoring happening. The subgenual cingulate is more evaluative. The posterior cingulate is certainly much more around um, uh, uh, drawing from memory and creating a narrative. So the cingulate is this sort of really important structure that it helps connect frontal circuitry with thinking and emotions to the bodily experience. And we call that interoception.
Hmm.
It's the very unique experience of humans to subjectively, especially mammals, just in general, primates, exhibit this sort of consciousness of threat. It's embodied. It's embodied because threat is the easiest sort of example of the body being very different than at baseline due to a very specific experience of feelings and interpretation of environmental cues. So we have this facial expression that looks similar to what you see in the reptile, right? The sort of the eyes wide and nostrils flaring, mouth retracted. Maybe you have this heart rate acceleration, piloerection, the hair stand up, fight or flight. We have cortisol and adrenaline that's surging, and we have to make a decision at that point. Either you fail to make a decision because you don't know what to do and you can't think, or you go with what was automatic. And if your automatic behavior has been trained to feel pain and emotional suffering from that experience, that's what happens. And you sort of just move into that pattern. If it is to fight, well, you start putting holes in walls and hitting people and showing aggression. Whatever the pattern is that you had with your embodied consciousness of threat over time is, again, this way is the reification of the self that we talked about in the beginning. That depending on what thoughts and feelings you put into your mind is going to determine what behavior you're going to have in the future. And so that sort of, I think of the self or the act of selfing, being a self in the world, as a sliding scale of 500 millisecond moments. And every 500 millisecond moments is a neurochemical cascade of events that happens to take perception and sensory experience, integrate it into predictive models that are priming you for a particular response, getting awareness, and then behaving. And that 500 millisecond window just follows you. So your embodied consciousness of threat has a particular set of very strong reactions and habits that becomes the narrative of fear. I might die. I'm in danger. And those thoughts are not going to help you.
No, but they're pretty prevalent.
Right. Exactly. Right. I'm going to die. I'm in danger. I'm a threat. And then there's your rigidness. Your chest gets tight. Your stomach drops. Your focus is narrow. And you have this sort of really predictive compression of the world that leads you to looking for immediate ways of survival. How am I going to survive? Right. But and this is all coordinated by brainstem, hypothalamus, amygdala. But the experience that's unique to humans is this, like I said, the insula and the cingulate cortex work together to identify sort of salience. And then it's very sensitive to social cues. If you feel like you are safe, right? This is where I like Steve Porges's work. I like when he talks about the sort of evolutionary sort of constraints around what we do with that fear signal and how it's evolved over time. That makes sense to me. It's only when we talk about the dorsal and vagal complex, the actual anatomy of these. I'm
with you. I mean, I'm actually giving a talk this weekend, and I bring up the model and I sort of say, hey, this is a wonderful metaphor. The science is not exactly there yet. May not actually get there, but the metaphor of what polyvagal is expressing can be very helpful.
Yeah, and especially the narrative around evolutionary behaviors and the value of social relations in how those behaviors are constrained or shaped. And that's really critical. And I see that the majority of people who love Porges's work are clinicians, especially some bodywork clinicians. But I do wait for that day when someone like Paul Grossman and Steve Porges are together on stage talking. But where the discrepancies are, those guys have been battling it out for a while. But there is value, of course, in all of these conversations and thinking about it from an evolutionary perspective of how we develop these fear responses, right? Again, it comes back to this embodied consciousness of threat. What is that for you? What is it when you are threatened? What does it feel like in your body when that's happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's, and when I'm hearing you speak of, and a few things have come up, but one thing is, it's like, I wish there was more David Vagos in the world because I think, I mean, one of the reasons, there's many reasons, but one I want to have you on is I think the work that we do is different, but there's overlaps. And I think they're both relating to whether we call it embodiment, whether we call it states of being, whether we call it awakening or whatever that sort of is, there's a similarity. And the premise is, I think underneath it is, how can the world be a more enriched, more healthy, more whole place? And I think we're doing it from different ways, but again, there are these overlaps. And like everyone, I'm biased in what I find works for me. I find works for me, and I want more of that. And almost everything you're saying, I'm just nodding my head and saying, yes, preach on, preach on, brother.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing is, you surround yourself with people in social situations, some of which trigger you often to have that, negative or destructive kinds of emotions that aren't healthy for you, that are maladaptive. And those people are in your life and you can't avoid them. Right. So the hard part is like, well, how do you surround yourself with the people that you resonate with and that make you feel good and, that bring you up and just create joy, aside from, your pets or your children. Hopefully, I think my kids are now turning teenagers. So there's a little bit less of the love as there used to be. But
yeah, mine's turning 1, and every minute I have, I just can't stop kissing her. It's the best. I mean, it just is. Yeah.
Yeah. And people have the same experience with pets, right? Dogs, cats.
I love my dog.
Whatever they are. Yeah, exactly. That if you surround yourself with those kinds of social relations, right? And that those things make you feel good, it's therapeutic, right? Same with nature. Like I moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Vancouver, British Columbia.
Not that different.
And the context, the environment is like enough to soothe me anytime I'm distraught in any way. I just look out at the mountains and it makes me feel better. So
for sure,
there is this sort of not only the awareness we talk about, like who are the people that make us feel bad, but who are the people that make us feel good? What are the contexts that make us feel better? Like, do we need to move? How do we shift from change? Is the hardest thing for humans to do is to change behaviors as we get old and embedded in patterns. To shift out of those patterns is really challenging. So I'm actually curious, Andrew, do you use, I'll just throw it out there, psychedelics in your treatment?
It's interesting. I actually was talking with a client yesterday, and because this person, what I would say is, and she's been doing therapy for a bit, and came to me because she had Rolfing done in Brazil. And Rolfing's an interesting thing because we're really kind of split. There are some who are just really physical, and there are some of us who are much more perceptual, that even like we don't even need to touch people. We can move and explore perceptual awareness together. And I was working with her, and it was clear to me that there was like 2 or 3 physical, emotional, I don't know what sort of blocks. And as she moved through them, everything would change. And I said to her, I said, I was trying to kind of find a way to bring that up. And I said, the best therapeutics I've ever had in my life was probably my first time doing LSD.
Mm.
But what I realized as I was saying that, and I told her about it, I said the reason why it was so beneficial for me is I had no intention for it to be healthy. And I think that this is actually one of the harms. I don't think psychedelics are the end all be all that they're praised to be. I think they're good. I think in the right use, which I don't think most places are, and most when I get clients who are psychedelic facilitators, they're very disembodied from my standpoint. They've used this tool and they've gotten a new conceptual awareness that hasn't actually brought them into it because the intent, I believe, because the intention hasn't again kind of blocked it. And it's so I'm not against them. I think they
Yeah.
can be very helpful,
Yeah.
but I think that there's something in it that I don't actually think is very healthy in it, if that makes some sense.
Oh yeah, it's a good point that people often in this field forget to mention is that, the whole point of many of these practices, for spiritual health,
Mhm.
are intended to deconstruct the ego,
Mhm.
right? Dissolve the sense of self. And that's actually where the therapeutic work starts. But in many cases, my own observations and
Mhm.
from others
Mhm.
has been that psychedelics actually strengthen a sense of self.
Mhm.
In fact, so much so that it's self-grandizing,
Mhm.
right? Like you become even more powerful because I've
Mhm.
done
Exactly.
ayahuasca and
Yes.
DMT in the last like 6 months, and my journey was so empowering.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring it up is only because there's a model that Robin Carhart Harris put out that talks about, he calls it canalization, which is actually a metaphor based on work that was done in the 40s by Ralph Gerard and Donald Hebb, who were looking at memory formation and how that LTP, long-term potentiation, the way memories are formed in the cell,
Mm.
is through repetition, through strong, repetitive stimulation that activates these circuits in the hippocampus to just basically be firing around and round and round and round in the dentate gyrus, and that causes long-term connections and associations built around the stimuli that were associated with it. So if so Robin's model, who's a big psychedelic researcher, his idea was that people who are depressed, and why do psychedelics work for people who are depressed, is that they have these strong patterns
Mm-hmm.
that have become deeply entrenched. So he calls them like canals.
All right.
They're so deeply entrenched that their patterns are so strong that it's hard to get out of that kind
For
of
sure.
pattern.
Sure.
And we know, right, over time, it just becomes harder to break a pattern or a habit. And that psychedelics have a mechanism to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They disrupt the patterns very strongly, especially at a high dose of psilocybin, for example, 35 milligrams. You're gonna go into a very labile state where all your brain networks are in this sort of state of entropy. And this is, he calls it the entropic brain hypothesis. The idea is that if we have networks that are modules that are responsible for sensory processing, for salience processing, for central executive processing, all of those different networks are modules, and they break down while you're under the influence so that new tracks can be laid down that compete with those old ones, that can be adaptive and reinforced over time. And so anyone that you work with that has sort of these entrenched, canalized patterns, and that you can't seem to get them out of it, I throw it out there only because
I hear you, and I actually I have a client who it does do psychedelic stuff, and I have sent people to her for that for exactly what you're saying. But I still see them, and I see them afterwards because my concern, again, tying this in, is that yes, it does help them get out of that trench, and there's almost no better way that I found to speed it up as quick as it does. But all of the embodiment we're talking underneath it, none of that changes. And so we haven't actually changed the patterns and the habits that have kept us there. we've changed the top, which is helpful and can create a cascade. It can, but in my experience, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. And right now it's the tip of the iceberg being touted as almost the whole iceberg. And so that's where my concern comes in more from. But I hear you.
There's hype. There's hype. I mean, the hype is always a problem.
Well, it's the same with mindfulness. Exactly. I mean, to me, meditation and psychedelics are actually the same thing. They're disassociated processes, which can be great. The question is sort of, again, well, what's underneath it? How do we integrate it back in? And what's the intention? Because often the intentionality of even going into mindfulness is to be healthy. And it's these processes to dissolve the ego, but it's all coming from the ego. It's just it's a trick of reifying itself.
Oh, totally. And so I said before how you often see these people who take psychedelics that it actually strengthens the sense of self. Yeah. Well, if you look at all the research in which I have for mindfulness-based interventions, and I've looked at it we did a meta-analysis about this. This is published. Happy to share it with you and your audience. Looking at all the mindfulness, at the strongest trials of mindfulness-based interventions over 8 weeks that have compared it to an active control or a wait list, and looked at outcomes related to self-related processing. So things like either rumination or self-compassion or interoception, so body awareness. These are all related to self-experience.
Right.
And you look at the data, and what the data shows is that in general, what you see is there is some decrease of ruminative experiences, but for the most part, it activates self-related outcomes that are strengthening a sense of self, not what the Buddhists of mindfulness is asking it to do. Is to deconstruct the ego.
Right.
Instead, your self-compassion is actually a self-strengthening outcome where you're feeling more kind to yourself. You're feeling more confident about who you are. You're feeling a little bit more socially aware of how other people experience pain and suffering too. But for the most part, it's strengthening a sense of self rather than dissolving that sense of self.
But I see, for me, I think that's less about mindfulness and more about how mindfulness has become, if that makes sense.
Oh,
and so,
yeah, right. Okay, but I'm just saying, what does the literature show?
For sure. I mean, there's a joke I sort of have when people come in and they tell me, like, they do breath work, they do yoga, they do mindfulness, and all things I've done in my life and trained in my life. And there's sort of a joke that most, if not many, of the meditation and breath work and psychedelic people are assholes. Like they've just got this tool and this identity, and because it's quote unquote healthy. But like when you look at the embodiment, and you look at how they move. So what I was trained is to look how people move, and not to define it as anything, but to show the body is actually interacting with the world, because it shows us so much. We talked about how the face is, but even how the arms swing and how the body meets the ground and how it takes up space or it doesn't. Yeah. And many of those people, there is, again, I'm going to say, we haven't even really defined this word. We won't have time for it today, but I'll say that there's a lack of embodiment in there, because it's shut off through more cortical, through more cognitive ways. And, I think it's very rare when I talk about this, people get it. And I believe you do get it. So I'd love, again, offline, maybe chat more, or I'm curious about the trials or the clinics that you're doing, because it's very hard I don't actually even know how, like when I work with people, I'll just, at the end, I do this sort of thing. I have them walk and I just sort of touch in a certain way. And they almost always say, wow, like even yesterday, someone said, you're a magician. I said, I'm not a magician. I'm just responding. I'm not even thinking. I'm just being with you and responding with you. And all of a sudden I sense, hey, if we touch here and there, something will shift, and they breathe, and there's no intentionality to it. It's really just an offering. And I was thinking about this when you talked about compassion. To me, compassion has very little to do with self in the way that you were talking about it. It has to do with a real, there is a self and there is no self. I'm meeting the world and just with love and care, and however things go, they go. and there's not that good or bad. There's just love, which some would say is good, but I would say love isn't even good or bad. It's just love. It's just this presence. And
Yeah.
so I'm kind of getting on a riff, but I think
No, it all relates. Yeah,
yeah.
like trying to pick up the thread. I mean, I started to think about other things about phenomenology and love, but I mean, one of the things that we've been sort of hitting upon is, well, I am always looking for measures, like,
Yes.
So at one point there was this study that looked at resting bitch face. It's like basically like, what does your body and face look like when you're just feeling like, kind of ornery and angry and sort of existentially threatened or something, right? And to have that kind of uh blueprint or just slice of body experience that you can interpret and measure and look at. So one of the things that I'd love to see, which is not really in existence yet, but maybe there's a resting asshole measure. Also.
I think it's the same. The RAM and the RBG, yeah, RBI,
right.
yeah.
Because like you're saying, there is a bodily experience that, and and it's energetic. And this is where I get started getting really excited, because I'm doing some work now with energy, trying to put it into a sort of into a Western framework for energy. Like, instead of talking about energy in the woo-woo, talking about energy from metabolic systems level energy, but also bringing in some of the indigenous ways of understanding energy. When you're standing in an elevator next to someone who may be an asshole versus somebody who may be really open-hearted and loving, you feel that.
But I think, yes, but I think a lot of it has to do with a few things. I wouldn't not call it energy.
Okay.
I think it has to do with how we are first perceiving them, which is energetic. All sight is energy. But there's a perception
bias, right?
Right. So we see them. We have that first sort of, again, a large subconscious, how we take them. I will sometimes say to my clients before they come in, or if I'm working with kids, I have a few kids coming in, and I let the parents know, listen, I'm 6'4". And so let your kids know I'm large, I'm goofy, but I'm large, because when you see a 6'4" person, it's not necessarily like, you're not going to necessarily act the same way as when you see a 5 foot person. There's more of me. I'm more. So even just see, the first thing is you see the size, the shape, and then you're responding partly to the body. We're also responding to the clothes. There's all these subtle, like semiotic markers.
Oh yeah.
But there is, I would agree. Like the easier way, I think,
contributes.
The easier way I think of bringing what you're talking about energy is, you're walking down the street, you don't hear anything, but you just feel someone behind you. So that way you haven't actually seen them. There is no, so you cut out all of those markers, and there is a real felt sense of something behind you. That, I would say, is energetic, but I still think it's more. And you might. I'd heard something about cranial nerve N maybe being related. I don't know if you're familiar with that. There's a newer nerve that was discovered that they didn't want to call 13, because it doesn't come from when you're looking at how it develops, it doesn't come 13th. And so there was sometimes cranial nerve X or cranial nerve N. There's a few other names of it. And there was one thought that it might have to do with like detecting pheromones or other things like that. And so I'd be curious to know more, but I'm with you that in this quote unquote energetic, but for me, I struggle with the word energetic, because I still think it is a biological mechanism, and yet I don't know how it is. And so I'm with you. It's more there's something in that, but yes, I do believe there's a resonance that, the way I've always described it, is nervous systems resonate in some sort of way. And so that resonation, when we see someone, we just see someone frowning, we generally, unless we're like completely narcissistic, we naturally have a sense of there's a, even if we don't like that person, there's a response to it that's going on. Or if we do with it, we see someone scared, we get in an elevator, there's a resting asshole face. There is this sort of thing there.
Yeah. Yeah, and and so okay, there's a lot here.
So,
We're sort of entering into a deep territory
mhm.
of energy, but I will say, okay, just to start, there are 12 cranial nerves.
Yeah.
Everything from oculomotor to just facial nerves and glossopharyngeal that controls the tongue and the mouth and swallowing. So there are 12 of those nerves. There was a nerve that, as far as I know, sometimes I guess it is referred to as cranial nerve N or nerve zero,
No, zero.
right? Which is a vestigial nerve that hasn't really been studied
Right.
well enough. But the idea is that there has to be some kind of nervous system communication about pheromones that are um, unobservable other than through, well, there have been pheromones identified in other species, not in humans. We do know that we're very sensitive. For example, females are very sensitive to entrainment with menstrual cycles with other women, and also through the sweat of their partners. So if they're female or male partners sweat in a t-shirt and you give it to them for a while, it actually has a physiological effect on them. So something about non-odorous smells have to do with sharing social kinds of energies that could influence our physiology. So it's thought that there is a nervous system that is responding to that. Now, just expanding on that a little bit further, when I was talking about energy, I was saying that we now know there are very specific energy systems, channels for life sustaining energy in the body and the brain. The glymphatic system is the one that I've been studying in the brain. And there are parallel concepts in systems, so many other indigenous wisdom-based traditions like Tibetan medicine, Ayurveda, Tibetan or traditional Chinese medicine describe subtle and gross energy channels, sa, nadis, meridians, as conduits for life-sustaining energy, lung, prana, chi. And the idea is that by integrating at least some of the neuroscience with some of the energy metabolism research, we're starting to see that sleep, consciousness, social functioning, immunity, and neurodegeneration are all influenced by these specific channels and energy that runs through them. So, I like to always say, to quote that, I don't know the origin of this, but Nikola Tesla would always say, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
Right.
And so this is, I think, the forefront of science right now, which gets me excited, is the new science of energy. Bioenergetics is the field that most people are referring to.
We can't. That there's another bioenergetics was a method that came out, I think, in the 70s, which has, so there's probably at least two different meanings of that. So you're talking about, I think, more the scientific bioenergetics and not the work of, I think it was Alexander. I think it was FM Alexander. It came out of Reiki and psychology, but you're talking about, I think, something different.
Okay, yeah, I am talking about subtle energy. And people who have now been able to show that using things like Reiki. No, it's the same thing.
No, not Reiki. Reikians. I can't remember. There was Wilhelm Reich was a contemporary of Freud's, who came up with he was one of the first people that really wrote body-based psychotherapy. And I think a student of his was Alexander, who developed something called bioenergetics, but it's a little bit different. So same word, but different.
Alexander technique, is that?
Nope, different. Just happen to both have the same name, but
yeah. Well, there's been a resurgence of bringing that term or that concept back. That basically the energy of biology, right? So how does energy work in what we can think of as biofield, right? There might be a field of energy that we can study that relate a lot to these channels that we're able to identify: the interstitium, the glymphatic system, and the lymphatic channels, right? These are all systems that have been identified biologically, and they fit into the models of traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Native American, Vedic, Indo-Tibetan medicine. They all fit with what has been described traditionally. And I was trying to make the point related to anybody who's still listening is that feeling that you get when you're in an elevator, right? You either resonate with someone or you don't. Like, you feel that, right? Or if somebody's walking up behind you. That is something that we're trying to better understand, is like the field of energy that is created by your own presence. So we've already mentioned that your body posture can have an impact on your own experience. We talked a little bit about the Duchenne smile. We talked a little bit about, the super, man posture or whatever, some superhero posture, right? Those can all have effect on physiology, but also things like we just mentioned, pheromones that we release that are hard to observe. There could be environmental factors like nature, like when you're surrounded by nature, that's going to affect like the energy around you. But we're all surrounded by energetic fields. There's electrical potential in our brains and our bodies that are constantly shifting. So we just don't have the methods to measure these systems yet. But I'm most excited about the future of bioenergetics, which is, the neurosciences are, I think, getting more excited about it. The papers that are coming out in Science, Nature, Cell, the top journals are focusing on healing frequencies, sound frequencies that entrain the brain and have an effect on these energetic systems. So it's pretty profound.
It's pretty profound. Again, my critique to that is it's great, but we're not changing we're not changing the embodiment underneath it. We're going to the smoke alarm and we're working on that instead of actually working on the fire. But I think it doesn't have to be one way or the other. You can work both ways. I do think it's very important to work on the brain, but I also think a lot of what we're working on the brain, there's so much more to the brain than we're working on, and there's so many more to the processes. But maybe I'm just biased because I like the body.
I think you're right. There is a sort of brain centric view about health and just the science of our experience. Phenomenology is very brain centric, but it's the philosophers, I think, and the clinicians like yourself who are really pushing the body as to be part of the equation. So interoception is probably the hottest topic of
I had a neuroscientist to talk about interoception before.
Well, I'm curious because there's not much to say.
Well, he was a massage practitioner. I don't know if you think he was first a neuroscientist, and then he's trying to kind of push that model more forward within the massage world about the importance of interoception and just kind of bringing even some of the science of it into that.
Well, the science is unfortunately pretty weak still. We don't have a good handle on what it is. What we do know is that it's different from the snake's experience of fear. We do have an interoceptive experience or a conscious experience of threat that can be very unique to being human. Right? So that it touches upon some of the polyvagal kind of stuff that Porges talks about, but also really talks about this energy idea that we're getting at, that we just don't have the tools to measure yet. Right now, the only thing that people use are like, there's a heartbeat detection task, which sucks. How well can you detect your heartbeat? There's a guy, Sahib Khalsa, who's at UCLA, who's expert at interoception. If you get a chance to talk to him, he's really amazing. He'll put like little robots swallow like a little pill, and your experience of what's happening inside your body, you swallow something like that is can measure different
interesting
outcomes with it. There's very limited ways that we can study it.
Right.
And if we say, oh yeah, look, there's anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex lighting up together. Oh, it's interoception.
Yeah.
But ACC and insula light up for a lot of things other than interoception. So it's hard to put a finger on, especially because it's non-conceptual.
Right.
So it's hard to describe.
Right.
And hard to measure. And my take is, as a good social disruptor of things, is to think about energy from a novel viewpoint instead of woo-woo, but metabolic energy that surrounds us. We used to have these things called the cameras, the Brilliant photography.
Really, thank you. Yeah,
it looks at the aura. Okay, I have these. It was not very good technology.
I don't think
there's something to it, and we need to be better at measuring that energetic systems around the body, and we'll have a better mechanism or better model from which to study embodiment and action, and really our experience of what it's like to be human in a body in relation to other bodies.
Yeah. I'll close up. I made one mistake earlier. I said FM Alexander was bioenergetics. It was Alexander Lowen. I confused. FM Alexander was Alexander Technique, which is what you said. I confuse names often, and sharing the name Alexander confused me. I actually have to have lunch before my next client, and this is such a pleasure, David. I just really appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing out there.
Thanks.
And thanks for being very generous with your time and your information. And I know people will get a lot out of it.
Yeah, they can always find my work, contemplativeneurosciences.com. That's a good place to find my work. And
it's a great name.
It's been around for a while. Yeah, it's I do a lot of consulting now, so that's a great place to, if people are interested in working with me, that's a good place to
awesome. Yeah, I hope they do. All right, have a good rest of the day out there. We'll be in touch. Cheers.
Take care. Take care, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching Into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about David at contemplativeneurosciences.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching Into Presence. Bye for now.